In this lesson, we're going to take a look at some of the capabilities of ZBrush 3 as far as being able to use photographs as texture painting objects. Okay, so here's our Rhino completed, and this is using the poly painting method that we looked at throughout the course of this training kit. So poly painting is one of the methods that we can use within ZBrush to create textures. Another method that we have is the ability to actually use images and photographs and then project those onto our mesh. So let's take a look at that particular method. Let's first go ahead and clear off all this poly painting information. We'll select a white color, and underneath the color pull down menu, we'll fill this object. Okay, so that's wiped out all the poly painting that we've done. And now we're ready to actually come in and paint some texture. So a couple things we need to do first. We need to actually make a texture that sits on top of this object. And this can be any size that you want. Usually I find about 2K or about 2048 by 2048 to be a pretty good size. Let's make a new texture. So there we are, new blank texture that's been applied to this object. And the other thing is that really, since we're not going to be painting on individual polygons, in this instance we really don't need our poly count to be very high. So we can start to lower this and drop this down a couple of subdivision levels. Okay, and also for this method we have to make sure that there are some kind of UVs on this object already. Otherwise this method that we're about to explore won't work. Alright, so this method of texture projecting is going to rely on the projection master, which we've had a chance to take a look at very briefly already. And also we're going to be utilizing a plugin that can be downloaded for free from ZBrush Central, and that is called the image plane. Or rather, this is called image plane 3.1, since this is updated for ZBrush 3.1. It'll come with instructions as far as how to install it and how it gets used. And once that's installed, you'll be able to find it underneath the texture menu inside image plane. Okay, so let's jump over into Projection Master and take a look at this. Really, we're just going to need to paint color for this instance. Okay, so let's come in and activate this image plane. And the first thing it's going to ask is, which image do you actually want to try to project onto this mesh? So let's take a look through here and see if we can find an image. Let's use this one at the bottom, this Rhino head large. Click open, give this just a moment, and now you can see that this image has been overlaid on top of our mesh. So to move this image around, it can be done just like what we can move around within the 3D workspace. If I hold Alt and left click, I can shift this image around. And if I switch to just the rotate on Z-axis, I can actually rotate this little guy around. And what I'm doing is just rotating the image that's being projected on here. So let me go ahead and try to move this roughly into place. I'm going to start by lining up the eye area. And now, what is really nice about this image plane is the fact that we can actually, using our move tool here in this projection master, actually grab this image and start to shift some of these areas around. So we can start to pull some of these areas down, start to pull them forward if we need to in order to readjust some of these areas. The problem is that sometimes some of these areas do get a little bit stretched out because of the inability to actually grab an area that falls outside the viewable area. That's okay. Let's come in and try to realign this eye a little bit better. Bring this area down. Let's start to now bring some of these areas around the mouth up and try to get those lined up a little bit better. You can grab areas that are larger or smaller by adjusting this brush size or this draw size. So you can see how we can really just kind of warp this image into place until it fits nicely over our mesh. So let's grab some of these areas and begin pulling these upward a little bit more. Let's come in and down along this bottom area, start to pull this down until it lines up a little bit better. Okay, so once we have this in place, now we can pick up our object, and in this case we may or may not want it to be double-sided. Let's go ahead and turn off the fade so that way the image should be projected across to both sides. We'll pick this image up, and there we go. And you can see how this image has actually reconfigured itself to fit across the UV layout of this particular object. We now have this image that is projected and fits perfectly. Right? So that's how we can use the photographic methods of being able to texture this. Now, the main problem with using this particular method is that you're going to have to make sure that you have images that have plenty of detail in them. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to capture some of these fine little details, such as the wrinkles and areas like that. Another sometimes potential problem with this is that the lighting, if you're going to be using different images to stitch between, the lighting may not match up between those, so that becomes an issue of concern. And then also, you may also need to project from different directions. So even after doing these initial projections, it may become necessary to take the resulting texture back into Photoshop for some initial retouching. Right? And sometimes if I'm going to be utilizing this method, I'll start by projecting from one direction, get it looking good, and then actually save out the map at this state. Then start again, project some more areas, and save that map out. And then what I can do is take those various maps and then combine and stitch those together within something like Photoshop, and gives me a little bit more control, and really you get the best of both worlds. So now, with this texture on here, again, because we're using UVs and not poly painting, I can start to raise my subdivision levels up, and we see those results. Right, so that's a look at using the Projection Master together with the Image Plane Z plugin to create these really nice projected textures on your 3D mesh.